do you want?
Chapter 42. Zero became strong enough to help dig the hole, and when he finished, it was over 6 feet deep. He filled the bottom of it with rocks to help separate the water from the dirt. He was still the best hole digger around. "This is the last hole I will ever dig," he declared, throwing down the shovel. Stanley smiled. He wished it were true, but he knew that they had no choice but eventually to return to Camp Green Lake. They couldn't live on onions forever. They had been completely around the Big Thumb. It was like a giant sundial. They followed the shade. They were able to see out in all directions, and there was no place to go. The mountain was completely surrounded by desert. Zero stared at the Big Thumb. "It must have a hole in it," he said, "filled with water." "You think?" "Yeah, I think so." "Where else could the water be coming from?" Zero asked. "Water doesn't run uphill." Stanley bit into an onion. It didn't burn his eyes or his nose, and in fact, he no longer noticed a particularly strong taste. He remembered that when he had first carried Zero up the hill, how the air had smelled bitter. It was the smell of thousands of onions, growing and rotting and sprouting, and now he didn't smell a thing. "How many onions do you think we've eaten?" he asked. Zero shrugged. "I don't even know how long we've been here." "I'd say a week," said Stanley, "and we probably eat as much as 20 onions a day, so that's 280 onions, said Zero. Stanley smiled. "I bet we really stink." 2 nights later, Stanley lay awake, staring up the star-filled sky. He was too happy to fall asleep. He knew he had no reason to be happy. He had heard or read somewhere that right before a person freezes to death, he suddenly feels nice and warm. He wondered if perhaps he was feeling something like that. It occurred to him that he couldn't remember the last time he felt happiness. It wasn't just being sent to Camp Green Lake that made his life miserable. Before that, he'd been unhappy at school, where he had no friends, and bullies like Derek Doone picked on him all the time. No one liked him, and the truth was, he didn't especially like himself. He liked himself now. He wondered if he was delirious. He looked over at Zero sleeping near him. Zero's face was lit up in the starlight, and there was a flower petal in front of his nose that moved back and forth as he breathed. It reminded Stanley of something out of a cartoon. Zero breathed in, the petal was drawn up, almost touching his nose. Zero breathed out, the petal moved towards his chin. It stayed on Zero's face for an amazingly long time before it fluttered off to the side. Stanley considered placing it back in front of Zero's nose, but it wouldn't be the same. It seemed like Zero had lived at Camp Green Lake forever, but Stanley thought now. He realized that Zero must have gotten there no more than a month or two before him. Zero was actually arrested a day later, but Stanley's trial kept getting delayed because of baseball. He remembered what Zero had said the day before. If Zero had just kept those shoes, then neither one of them would be here right now. As Stanley stared at the glittering night sky, he thought there was no place he would rather be. He was glad Zero put the shoes on the parked car. He was glad they fell from the overpass and hit him on the head. And when the shoes first fell from the sky, he remembered thinking that destiny had struck him, and now he thought so again. It was more than a coincidence. It had to be destiny. Maybe they wouldn't have returned to Camp Green Lake, he thought. Maybe they would make it past the camp and then follow the dirt road back to civilization. They could fill the sack with onions and 3 jars of water, and he had his canteen as well. Maybe they could do it. They could refill their jars and canteen at the camp, maybe sneak into the kitchen and get some food. He doubted any counselors were still on guard. Everyone had to think they were dead. Buzzard food. He would be living the rest of his life as a fugitive. The police would always be after him, or at least they could call his parents and tell him that he was still alive, but he couldn't go visit them in case the police were watching his apartment. Although, if everyone thought he was dead, they wouldn't bother to watch his apartment. He would have to somehow get a new identity. Now I'm really thinking crazy, he thought. He wondered if crazy people would wonder if he was crazy. But even as he thought about this, an even crazier idea kept popping into his head. He knew it was too crazy to even consider. Still, if he was going to be a fugitive for the rest of his life, it might help to have some money. Perhaps a treasure chest full of money. You're crazy, he told himself. Besides, just because he found a lipstick container with KB on it didn't mean that there was treasure buried there. It was crazy. It was all part of his crazy feeling of happiness. Or maybe it was destiny. He reached over and shook Zero's arm. Hey, Zero, he whispered. Huh, Zero muttered. Zero, wake up. What? Zero raised up on his head. What is it? You want to dig one more hole? Stanley asked him.